Many of the videos in my channel are focused on studying languages, in particular studying and improving your English, but also mastering other languages. My basic philosophy is that there is still a place for multilinguals, even polyglots today. Studying multiple languages at the same time is a good idea. There are many different ways to study a language, and I discuss some of them. Ways to improve your vocabulary through reading, regular writing practice, other techniques that you can apply in order to improve your vocabulary, your grammar, and so on. But there is one technique that is the holy grail of language learners, and that is speaking. Speaking as much as you can. Speaking is a fast way to translate your thoughts into words and to make sure that you can articulate your meaning on the spot. And that makes it a perfect exercise for your ability to master a language. Today, I'm going to discuss a new tool that just started that allows you to practice your speaking in multiple languages at almost zero cost in a way that is effective and efficient. We are going to learn how to use a chatbot such as the one offered currently by ChatGPT in order to speed up and improve your language learning. My name is Shai Dotan. I'm Associate Professor of International and Public Law at the University of Copenhagen Faculty of Law, and the purpose of this series of lessons is to help you improve your English and your research skills. Before we introduce the chatbot of ChatGPT, and there are probably similar tools that are available today, I'm not discriminating between them, I'm just speaking about the tool that I used. Let's speak a little bit about why is it so important to speak. If you are trying to learn the language, you can separate between a passive capacity to identify words and to use them, and the active capacity to use them in sentences as you think or speak or write. So you can read a lot of text and recognize words, and the text would be immediately understandable for you. And that's great, and that's a really good practice. You can learn a lot from it. But even if you would do that, sometimes for years, you will not get the confidence to start to speak and to use the language actively. And that's really the purpose, usually. You want to be able to use the language as a tool. Why is that? I don't have the psychological training to understand the way the mind works in this respect. I know it from my own experience. I know that sometimes I feel very comfortable understanding words, but when I try to speak, the words disappear. They're not fair, they're not available to me on the tip of my tongue. And that's something that can be very, very stressful and can silence me down in certain languages. I'll give an example. I was trying to study French for quite a few years. First, learning a little bit of vocabulary, a little bit of grammar. I had several weeks with a private tutor that tried to improve it. The most important exercise that I did was read, and I read not hundreds of books, but quite a few that gave me the capacity to read a book within my field with reasonable speed and were understanding most of the words. And because I was not very diligent in my studies, I didn't check words that I didn't know in the dictionary. So probably there were a lot of things that I missed, and I could misunderstand sometimes the whole paragraph. But I could probably understand quite a lot of the text in the book, especially if it was relatively easy French, not too complicated, quite well. But then when I thought about speaking, I every time froze. I found a good friend and colleague who agreed to speak to me, and the first classes were very, very difficult. It was very difficult to start speaking. After I got used to it, slowly, my passive understanding, the words that I remembered in my mind, became also active in my head, and I was able to use them. But this is a process that requires exercise. Now, the three main ways to make this exercise are the following. One is thinking in a certain language. When I try to master a certain language, I try to tell to myself, I will use my inner monologue in order to think in this language. This is a very useful tool because it's the most private act that you can do. Thinking in your head, you get used to using the language. It has disadvantages. One problem is that we don't have so much time today, usually, that we actually use our inner monologue. So if every day would be working in the nature for work for an hour or two, then that's a great time. You're in a relaxing environment, you're walking, it's always good to think when you're walking, and you just let the thoughts go from one idea to the other. And then they can actually form long segments of mental text inside your head. If you are, like most people today, living between your iPad and your phone and your iPhone and constantly being exposed to a lot of noise, you don't have so much time to do that. Even if you are doing that, the problem with thinking is that you're not so committed to the sentences that you're using. You may think very, very quickly about several different options. You're not trying to, in a way, edit yourself as you think. And that's something that I think can be a disadvantage because you're looking for uh, sentences and constructions that are more stable, well thought through, and not just a barrage of different ideas coming from different directions without forming a consistent inner monologue. So, if you solve the first problem, which is having enough time to practice your inner monologue in a relaxed environment, the second problem may take care of itself. You may be able to use these long narratives as you speak, but if you're not able to do that, then probably this problem will remain. And even if you find the time and force yourself to practice this thinking without the proper habit of doing so, you will find it difficult to produce a text that is equivalent to a text you would use in speaking or in writing. What about writing? Now, writing is a much more committed act of thinking. Everything is there on a paper or on a computer. You can edit it. You can try to make sure that you're using the best phrasing possible and give it a lot of thought. And writing is a very, very important exercise, especially if you want to be a writer. If you want to have a capacity to write beautifully in a short time, you need to practice that almost daily. Uh, but writing is time consuming, it's difficult, it comes at the expense of other tasks. It's difficult to do that without a strong sense of purpose or topic to write about. I can tell you about myself that I had years in which I basically forced myself to write quite a lot, almost every day, things that were not about to be published. Random essays, stories, emails to all kinds of distance acquaintances. And that was a very good practice, and I recommend it to all my students, and I should actually do it more myself. But to be able to do it at a sufficient volume to get better, especially in languages that you're not that good at, is usually a problem. Remember, if you're writing a different language, sometimes there's a different alphabet, which requires a different keyboard. It's a slow process of writing, and you may not know how to spell all the words that you want to use. And even if you do know all that and you solved all these technical problems, it's going to be much, much, much slower unless you are an amazing typist than the speed of your speaking voice. So we go to speaking. And speaking is a great tool to get better. I think, for example, when I was studying German, I did that mostly by speaking to my grandmother. And I think one of the best qualities that she had was she was mostly listening. She showed me affection and care, but she didn't provide any comment on the German itself and minimal comments on the content. And that was exactly what I needed because I was able to speak freely, just as if I would be thinking with my mouth open in a way, letting the words come out making mistakes, realizing that myself and trying to avoid them, and all these processes going on automatically. Now, it's difficult to do that without anybody listening to you. It's not impossible. Part of the reason I started this YouTube channel is so that we'll have the pleasure of talking to the camera, seeing myself speak, listening to myself, and trying to improve my speaking in English. And that's something that I recommend to anybody. Open a YouTube channel, record yourself on video, uh, listen to what you speak, and it will make you improve very, very quickly. But talking to somebody that gives you some level of response can help you in a variety of ways. First, it can keep a conversation going. Sometimes you don't have a whole lecture in your head. Many times, usually, that's the case. I mean, you're tired, you want to practice Italian. I'm trying to study Italian for the last year. I'm making very good progress. What a pleasure it would be to have the possibility to talk to an Italian just about what happened during the day, my thoughts, my ideas, any topic that comes to the head as we start to speak. So having this possibility to get some feedback is useful. It keeps the conversation going. If somebody is also proficient in the language that you're speaking in, they can give you some comments, and if they are good, we will do it in a very gentle way. So just like I do with my own children, I try not to say, no, you made a mistake. If I say, for example, I goed there, I don't say, no, goed is a mistake in English. What I do say is, you went there. And immediately my sons will understand, okay, went is the past tense of go, and we have a correct answer. Sometimes if I make the same mistake, I would highlight it and explain what is the correct version, but usually I would just try to use the correct version with proximity to the mistake that I made, and they would easily understand that that's something that they could do. So that's something that you can get with a person, something that keeps the conversation going and gives you some form of minimal feedback, correcting grammar, correcting spelling, or not spelling, but how you, the words that you use in the vocabulary, and correcting the way you pronounce them. The problem is that finding somebody who is knowledgeable in all the languages that you know, knows the topic that are interesting to you, is always there, so not only has unlimited time, but is always ready to speak to you, is something that most people will find very, very challenging. I think that unless you are King Louis XIV, you don't have a court of geniuses going around you and providing you this service 24/7. But now we have, all of us, a capacity to use this tool, because ChatGPT offers a chatbot that is knowledgeable of all the languages that I tried. I tried Hebrew and English and German and Danish and French, which I tried to speak as fluently as possible, and it responded in these languages with great fluency. Not always a perfect accent, by the way, but very high level of fluency. I tried several other languages that I know a little bit about, just to try to quiz it and test it. It knew everything. So any language that you can think of, you probably find ChatGPT able to speak, and unlimited knowledge. So you can talk about any topic that you want. Discuss next movie that you want to see on Netflix, or discuss Shakespeare's plays or the Greek mythology. They will always be able to give you a very, very knowledgeable and intelligent answer. So no more of excuses of we have nothing to talk about. You can talk about anything you want. You can talk about food, you can talk about architecture, you can talk about travels. Everything is possible. And you can do it in any languages at any time, and everything is there waiting for you in these chatbots. Let's see what it provides. So the tool of a chatbot is relatively recent. From what I understand, it started right at the beginning of this year, 2025. I'm aware of the fact that there are other chatbots that existed prior to that. I'm also aware that there are several programs designed specifically for language learning, using something learning similar to a chatbot. I tried one of them to study Italian a few months ago, and it was quite good. It was quite expensive also if you want to make a subscription. Now you basically have the possibility to use it in ChatGPT. I use a Plus subscription. Probably you can maybe you have some access in the regular subscription, which is free, and probably if you use a Pro, you have even more. I understand that it doesn't depend so much on the number of minutes that pass, but on the number of queries that are given to the machine. But this number is quite significant when you're using Plus, so it's definitely enough to get you to learning. Now, how should you learn? I think you should do is you should start with um, defining your goals very clearly to yourself. So tell to yourself, for example, I want to practice my uh, German and French because I don't feel comfortable speaking because I haven't practiced it for quite a while, but I know the languages quite well. And I want to learn Italian because I'm trying to study it and I don't find other methods satisfactory. So I need a way to improve not just my fluency and my ease with the language, but also to build the vocabulary and to avoid making obvious grammatical mistakes. So you kind of define to yourself, these are kind of my goals here. I would say even more than that, I enjoy talking to ChatGPT in English, even though as you can see, I'm quite fluent in it. Sometimes feel more comfortable in it even when with my native language, from Hebrew. And even though I teach in Danish and I'm able to speak it with quite a high level of fluency, I can definitely use the practice to sound more natural or just to feel comfortable hearing myself speak. So here I kind of categorize the different levels of language that you can use. Try to make a menu like this for yourself. In fact, write it down. Write down the languages that you know or that you wish to know. Write how well you know them and what you want to do with the chatbot exercise. So that's the first step that you can do. Now, when you try to practice the languages, see that you can use the chatbot to practice languages of different level of proficiency. So for example, if I want to practice my Danish, my purpose is not to learn how to say simple things. My purpose is to be able to speak with the same ease that I'm speaking now in English, just naturally, without any awkward pauses, not looking for a word that I missed, speaking about any different topic without all the time going back to a small set of words instead of using a large and diverse vocabulary that is much more precise. So that's something that you can do and just put in the practice into it. I've tried to ask ChatGPT to comment on my language. It's not always easy to prompt it to do so. So if you are speaking language quite well, you can try to ask it several times. For example, stop me whenever I make a mistake in English. Try to fix this mistake. Or and maybe you will get a good result. I didn't practice enough to tell you with certainty if this would definitely work. But I think it's definitely worth a shot. And the computer definitely suggests this as one course of action. When I asked it how I can use it to learn, it says I can try to give you these comments. And sometimes I notice that I'm making these comments in a very, very gentle way. So just like I try to do with my children, try to use the proper word in a proper context close to the mistake that you've just made. So that's one possibility for you to use the language. If you're really, really just starting, just like I do in Italian, I would just ask it, even in a different language. I mean, just start to speak Italian with me and let's keep a conversation going. And you would say something like, what do you kind of ice cream you like to eat? And we just speak it out from there. And I make a lot of mistakes, but I'll be speaking. And as I do that, the words that I tried to study over the last year and a half or 2 years with very little success would slowly, slowly, slowly be more coherent in my mind, and I would be able to reach them and use them with much greater ease. And that's exactly what you're aiming to do. So depending on the level that you want to reach, this will determine the type of conversation. If what you want is basically to improve your presentation skills in language that you know quite well, speak fluently, just like I'm speaking now, and use the possibility of having somebody that listens to you, and provides some minimal feedback, which is usually very, very polite. And if you are trying to learn a language and you know very little, let ChatGPT be the teacher. Let him guide the conversation and try to respond in a way that is as similar to a real conversation as possible. I want to say something more beyond this obvious way to handle this as a tool. The first thing is one of the biggest challenges that I find in using several languages is what I've called in my book polyglot fatigue. Polyglot fatigue means that when I speak two languages that are very similar, close to each other, I get a block. I find it very, very difficult to continue. For example, it's almost freakish when it happens. If I were to start speaking Danish now, I'd probably be able to do quite well. But if you would ask me to give a speech in German for 5 minutes and immediately when the speech is over to start speaking Danish, I would not be able to do it. The words would just get mixed in my head. The languages are very similar, but also in my head they are very, very close because I studied both of them almost at the same time. I studied German a little bit first, and then I went into Danish and I focused on Danish for quite a while. So when I started out studying these languages, I made a lot of mistakes all the time. So when I started to speak Danish, for example, I would always say the word, instead of the word only, which is kun in Danish, I would say nur in German continuously, every time. It was very, very annoying because I was aware of a mistake and I often would catch myself making the mistake and try to fix it automatically, but I couldn't stop making the mistake. Now, even today, after so many years of experience, especially with the Danish, if I would speak in German and immediately switch, I would find it very difficult to do that. That's polyglot fatigue. Now, why do I say that? Not in order to give you an excuse, because that's difficult for everybody, but to use it as a method of training. I believe that if you are able to fight against this polyglot fatigue, you're able to make the language more easily accessible in your brain. So if I were to practice continuously speaking German, 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 Danish immediately, it would be very difficult at first and maybe very frustrating. But if I manage to pull it off, then suddenly the languages become closer to your active speaking capacity. And that's exactly what you want to reach. So I recommend this exercise. I use it myself. I would just use it with ChatGPT, where I will be speaking for, let's say, 10 minutes in one language, and then immediately switch to another language, especially languages that are similar. At first, you make a lot of embarrassing mistakes, but then you continue. The ChatGPT will not judge you. You shouldn't judge yourself. Just appreciate the difficulty of the exercise. And I believe, and I don't have enough experience to be sure that this will really be the case, but it will get better with time. And which is more important, afterwards, if I were to speak Danish on the spot, I think it would be even more natural because I have been through this difficult exercise of switching languages, and my brain is able to access this language immediately, even after using a very similar language just before that. Okay, so we described this new tool, the chatbot of ChatGPT. It's an amazing tool. I think the advantages are clear. You can speak as much as you want, at least within the limits that your subscription allows. You can speak with somebody that knows any language, that knows practically everything there is to know about any subject, whether it's current or classical or in any discipline, in any field. That's fantastic. What I want to do now is I want to present 4 problems that this chatbot still has, and I want to make it very clear these failings or these weaknesses are very small. They shouldn't determine your success of using this tool as a tool for studying. I think that there are also things that have to do mostly the way the product is designed. It's not like I would say, oh, technology today doesn't allow it. No, technology allows it. It's just that the product, the way it works, has certain advantages for certain fields, and for language study, it may not be always perfect. And I think that within a very, very near future, we see great advances that would make all these weaknesses practically disappear. Um, so the first weakness that I want to speak about is that I tried mostly one chatbot. I know that chatbots with a little bit of a different personality, but you're basically dealing with somebody who's a little bit of a dork. So they are nerdy. They don't have any sense of humor. They're always polite. They're always politically correct. This can be annoying for some people, but I also think this is something that damages your ability to learn, because eventually language is a matter of thinking as a human and communicating as a human. And human beings are not perfect. Sometimes they get angry, sometimes they make silly jokes, sometimes they show a lack of confidence, they don't feel comfortable, they have all kinds of mannerisms and everything that makes us human. And that's these things are often viewed as some form of shortcoming that we can try to chip off. But you take all of them off and you create something that is synthetically perfect. This can be very, very difficult to learn from them about the art of communicating and using language. Okay, so that's, I think, something that we need to be aware of. Uh, I know that ChatGPT already offers chatbots with different personalities. Some of them may be a little bit more outgoing and natural. I don't see any technological reasons why this should not be the case. So a chatbot that has, in addition to politeness and politically correct behavior, also empathy, human emotion, but also maybe anger or hot temper or something like this. This is all possible, and I think this will all eventually help you to learn better. What I think is that remember that you're dealing with a product that is designed to be sold to hundreds of millions of people who can all of them tape it and then run to the press and say, oh, this chatbot gave me advice on how to commit suicide. And that's real cases. You read it in the news every day. So they obviously have to be very, very careful. And sometimes they are too careful to make you able to learn as fast as possible. So just be aware of that. I would basically love to have a chatbot that is much more natural and human. The reason it's not behaving like this is not because it's not able to mimic human beings, it's because it doesn't want to go on a track that could be dangerous. And that's why we make a product that is safe but not perfect. Small weakness, just be aware of it. The other weakness is there are still cases where I see awkward pauses, small misunderstandings in a conversation. So I would start the conversation on one thing, I would switch to another thing, being so clear that I think a human being of mediocre intelligence would have understood that I speak about something else, and the ChatGPT would not pick that up, or they would start a new conversation relatively quickly, or stop and think for too long. All these things are, I think, will be fixed relatively quickly. I've seen how ChatGPT developed from 2 years ago to what it is today in the written version. I have no doubt that these things regarding the audio will develop very, very fast. So it's possible that even within a matter of months, all these things will just be not relevant, and it will be able to understand, respond, and communicate in a way that is, if not as natural as a human, for the first reason that I mentioned, as clearly as more efficient than a human. So it will not make this misunderstanding, awkward pauses, and so on. So this, I think, will also be resolved probably rather quickly. And already today, the product is good enough to learn with comfortably. You don't get any eerie feeling of talking to a machine in a way. You know that you're talking to a computer, but it doesn't really irritate you by appearing too unnatural, too robotic. So that's something that you be aware of. It gets better with time, and the conversation will be almost perfect probably relatively soon. Another issue that I noticed is that the ChatGPT remembers certain things that you say to it, but not everything. I was asking it, I was talking to it just before we started. I just introduced the topic to it and asked for some tips, which, by the way, were completely unhelpful. Very, very general. It's very bad in giving particular examples, but I use it as an opportunity to start off my thinking process and speaking by starting with ChatGPT. And I was about to mention, I was speaking about polyglot fatigue without mentioning the term. And when it says, this is actually a good example of polyglot fatigue, and I say, did you hear about this term from reading my book on the internet, or do you remember that we just discussed it yesterday? It admitted we discussed it yesterday. And then I said, okay, so yesterday I also played a game with you. The game is called Yes, No, I Don't Know, or in some countries, Incognito. I think about an historical character. You have to guess who it is by asking me questions. But I can only answer yes, no, or I don't know. So, can you remember the two characters we discussed? It answers no. Why can't you remember? You remembered polyglot fatigue. It was the same conversation. And it says there's some kind of a privacy rule that prevents me from remembering details. I don't know how you define details. To me, polyglot fatigue is also a detail. It's a particular choice of phrase that I invented. But just be aware that this could be annoying for you. Okay? If you talk to a human being who is not senile and he cares about you, you expect that the major things that you mentioned will be remembered. If you talk to ChatGPT, you get an experience that sometimes can be frustrating, where some things it remembers much better than a human, and some things it just forgets because of its privacy definitions. So just be aware of that as you structure your conversations. And finally, and most importantly, you probably are well aware of the problem of hallucinations. So making up sources that don't exist, making up arguments that don't exist, they look convincing, but if you try to listen to them, you realize, or check for the sources, you realize they don't exist. That's a major problem. All the large language models are fighting it. They're making significant progress in trying to do so. Imagine that you're not looking for a source. You're just making a conversation about the book that you read, for example. I had a very unpleasant experience with ChatGPT where I was speaking about the book and I speak about details in the book, and it would just invent, asking him about what happened in this scene, what appears in this picture mentioned in the book, and it would just invent something. But it's clear to me, would sound very convincing for somebody that didn't read the book. But then if you did read it, you should know that that's not the case. And that's very, very irritating because it looks like the commitment of a machine is not to truth, is to sounding convincing. And slowly, there is much greater concurrence between what sounds convincing and the truth. Because if you ask it to even quote passages from books in multiple languages, it to do it correctly and it to even interpret it correctly, and that's great. But then once in a while you just catch it and you would say, a person would just say, I don't remember this part of a book. Unless they have some kind of an implanted memory from another source, it would not just make up a story and not do so with great confidence and not do so repeatedly. So if you ask a person about a scene they don't know, they make something up, you ask them, they say, no, it's not that. They will not make something up again and again and again, every time just trying to provide something that sounds reasonable but is clearly not the case. And that's something that I find is very, very upsetting. And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges that these large language models are facing now. I heard about it a lot in the written version. Probably you would find something similar with a chatbot. It makes you feel very uncomfortable if you are really discussing things that matter to you, knowing that you are faced with somebody who is such a great manipulator, but they will tell you the truth 99% of the time, just so that the 1% of the time they want to mislead you, hopefully for no sinister reason, just to to please you at the moment, you will be able to do it with the most convincing manner. And that's just something that you need to be aware of. That's the hallucinations problem. Also, this is not a major problem for language learning. And that's exactly what we discuss here. So I think that, to conclude, this is an excellent tool. It's affordable, it's easy. Use it and improve the languages that you know very, very fast. That's all for today. From me, Shai Dotan. Please, if you like the video, like it. You are welcome to subscribe to my channel. Watch the other videos in which I teach how to improve your English and reach your skills. And until next time, keep learning.